And there's a couple different types of noise that I want us to think about. The first is sort of a channel noise. Just you can't hear. There's static. So the phone breaks out. The newspaper print is fuzzy. There's a power outage, so the television doesn't come on, or you can only see the image, you can't hear it. Semantic noise will also come into place, and the semantics, so this is going back to that encoding decoding step, that frame of reference. So is there a semantical problem if in your communication? Maybe they don't understand what you're trying to get. I think women and men tend to have semantic noise many times, at least I know I do with my husband a lot. You don't understand what the other one's trying to talk about, and so in that encoding decoding, you miss something there. We also have psychological noise. And psychological noise can be broken down a couple ways. First, selective exposure. We listen to things that reinforce our beliefs. I've got this picture of Little Bush up in the top right corner here. If you ever saw Little Bush, it was on Comedy Central, and it was basically a satire making fun of the Bush family, the cabinet he surrounded him with, and they were all these people, but in miniature form, basically. And so people who watched that were watching that to reinforce their beliefs. So maybe it became very popular, I think, with more of a Democratic crowd because it was reinforcing their beliefs and their opinions of these people. So they were selectively exposing themselves to that. Same thing we saw a lot during Vietnam, the underground newspapers that came up against war, against for free love. They weren't popular and they weren't long-lived because there was selective exposure to them. It was a small population who were taking advantage of these publications. We also have selective perception. We see and believe only what we want to see and believe. And this somewhat goes back to our semantics, but South Park is a great example of this, also on Comedy Central. Some people will see it as challenging culture, challenging the powers that be with the topics that they cover. Others will see it as just comedy, taking aim at everyone in a lighthearted way. I know people who hate the show because of the issues it brings up, and I know people who love it because it brings up all of these issues. So you see what you want to see, you believe what you want to believe. And some of the psychological noise comes in. We've seen a lot of research with politics in terms of how people see messages in political ads. If I'm Republican and I'm watching a Democratic commercial, I'm seeing what I want to see, I'm believing what I want to believe out of that ad. I may not be necessarily decoding it the actual way they mean for me to do that. And we've seen that a lot, again, on those sort of political lines. And then there's sort of that selective retention. We remember the things that reinforce our beliefs. So we remember the shows, the messages, the political ads that reinforce what we state. If you're looking at communication from the Farm Bill, depending on whether you're more interested in food stamps, more interested in subsidies, more interested in crop insurance, you're going to remember those messages happening that are reinforcing those beliefs or those things that are important to you. If the Farm Bill, you don't even know about it, then obviously it's not something that is in your belief system or in your conscious system to need to know, so you're not retaining it. If you think about it, what news have you heard, today? What did you remember seeing, hearing? What images do you remember? What ads do you remember? Why do you think those stuck with you? Why were those stories important to you? I thought was interesting, there was a ad on the radio talking about one of the quarterbacks for the Super Bowl and how even though he's multimillionaire, his father still is a trash truck driver. And So I think about, why did that story of all the things I've heard today stick with me? Well, because I have a close relationship with my parents, and I've always thought, what would I do for them if I came into millions of dollars? So that noise that comes into effect, really, that psychological noise can affect us. We also have other complexities. If we think about imagery, gestures, a man sign in America looks different than one in Europe, one in Mexico. We may have stop signs at roads, meaning stop your vehicle. We may have stop signs on farms, meaning don't come any further because of biohazard issues or food safety type issues. So communication is not always verbal. It can be very symbolistic, and we'll talk about semiotics as we go on, and how imagery really, when we think about that triangle of understanding, how those images really and those symbols can really make an impact on how a message gets through that communication channel. We also look at some of the other complexities and sort of in terms of credibility and perceptions. And this is going to come into play really next time when we talk about interpersonal theories. What are the competence of people? What are their character? We want to know that they're like us. They have similar backgrounds. We trust them. I love news anchors are a big one. You see the cast of the Today Show a couple years ago. Why were they culturally made up like this? Because every person could find somebody they related to, younger, older, male, female, Caucasian, Asian. They found a similarity to themselves, and so they saw that credibility. Back when Sarah Palin was running for vice president, there was a huge uproar about a Fox anchor. I can't remember where she was, but her picture's down here, and how much she looked like Sarah Palin. And so there was a lot of feedback to the station based on certain stories she did along with the election, that whether they agreed or disagreed, because of who they thought she was and their perceptions of who they thought she was. So when we start thinking about communication, it's a really hard process, because we have this semantic noise, we have this psychological noise, we have this channel noise, and then part of that channel noise really is who is giving that message. So who is the source? Is it you? Is it somebody else? If you think about a website, is it nicely designed versus very generic or amateurish? All of those kinds of things can come into credibility. And so as we start looking at some of the interpersonal things and how we talk to each other and how we understand each other, these things are really going to come into play.